Hollywood is bleeding, and the latest data coming out of Los Angeles tells a grim story. Film and TV production in the city plummeted by over 16% in 2025, leaving the entire film industry with just 19,694 shooting days. This is the lowest total we've seen since the 2020 lockdowns, and the impact is being felt at every level. Even A-list talent struggle to find consistent work between their major franchise obligations, which shows how deep the instability runs. While a loud corner of the internet insists that woke culture is the culprit, the reality is that it's a much more grounded reason than that. After spending 15 years in the industry wearing several different hats, I can tell you that the real villain here is not just politics, but economics. We are going to go over how the traditional Hollywood business model is collapsing and how writers and creators can do to survive in these times. The revenue streams that funded creative, risk-taking films for decades have vanished, and the truth is streaming has not replaced it. So to understand this, we're going to go over and we're going to go back to explain how Hollywood crashed and the exact reason for it. The 90s represented a unique era of risk-taking that gave us everything from Forrest Gump, Goodfellas, to the indie breakouts of Sundance like Pulp Fiction. During this period, different types of stories and new talents could thrive because the industry relied on three stable revenue streams. These acted as safety nets for original ideas, ensuring that a single bad weekend at the box office didn't mean the end of your career. The first pillar was the theatrical window. Going to the movies was still the primary weekend activity for most Americans, and ticket sales climbed steadily through that decade. This growth continued until admissions peaked at $1.57 billion in 2002. Because studios could count on the box office as a massive primary revenue driver, they had the capital to experiment with mid-budget dramas and high-concept comedies. But how do they justify the movies that didn't hit those numbers? The second pillar was the explosion of physical media. The market for VHS and DVD was so massive that it often competed with or even outperformed the theatrical box office in total earnings. At its peak in the mid-2000s, physical media generated about $16 billion annually in the US alone, making companies like Blockbuster and Hollywood Video household names. If you grew up in the 90s, you likely remember the ritual of heading to the video store after school to pick out a movie and ordering a pizza for the night. The specific revenue stream changed the math for every major studio. If a film didn't find its footing in theaters, the executives knew they had a chance to turn a profit on home video shelves. Many of our most beloved cult classics, including Donnie Darko, Fight Club, and Office Space, were actually considered theatrical failures. They only became culturally significant and financially successful because the physical media market gave them the time and space to find an audience. Let's look at Fight Club specifically to understand exactly what the industry has lost. In 1999, the film was a total theatrical disaster that cost $63 million to produce but only brought in $37 million domestically. That left the studio facing a $26 million loss without even thinking about marketing, which would be enough to end a director's career. That left the studio facing a $26 million loss without even considering marketing, which this would be enough to end a director's career in today's climate. However, the DVD market saved the film by selling over 6 million copies within its first decade of release. With those discs priced between $15, $20, and then later years maybe $5 or $7, more than $100 million in pure revenue flowed back to these studios. This turned a flop into a massive financial win, and because people could own the movie and watch it repeatedly with their friends, a theatrical failure transformed into a cultural phenomenon. Now, try to imagine Fight Club being released in 2026. It likely would even get a wide theatrical release, as the studio would probably position it as a prestige streaming title while hoping for enough awards attention to justify the cost. Since it isn't a massive blockbuster, audiences wouldn't show up to the theater and the film would fail to turn any kind of profit. Instead of becoming a cult icon, the movie would be buried deep in a streaming catalog, much like we are seeing with recent films like Caught Stealing. Despite having great reviews and strong performances, these projects stay classified as content rather than becoming classics. They exist to fill a row on the home screen rather than change the culture. The third pillar was TV syndication. Once a project finished its run in theaters and on home video, it generated long-tail revenue through cable licensing for years. This passive income created a financial cushion that encouraged studios to keep experimenting with new ideas. These three streams worked in harmony, allowing a studio to greenlight a mid-budget script, knowing that even if the box office was soft, the other windows would eventually make the project profitable. Hollywood existed in this comfortable equilibrium until the market crashed in 2008. As investments dried up and consumer spending habits shifted, the stage was set for the rise of Netflix and the eventual collapse we are witnessing today. On February 1st, 2013, Netflix fundamentally shifted the landscape of entertainment by releasing House of Cards. At that time, the very notion of debuting a high-budget series featuring A-list talent directly on a digital platform was practically unheard of. Yet the show became an immediate sensation and the streaming wars eventually started. Throughout the 2010s, Netflix watched its stock price and subscriber base grow at a staggering pace. Naturally, every major studio in town wanted a slice of that subscriber pie, which triggered a massive gold rush toward digital distribution. First came Amazon, and by the time 2020 arrived, every heavy hitter had joined the fray, including HBO Max, Disney+, Paramount+, Peacock, and Apple TV+. Everyone in the executive suites was convinced that streaming would finally replace the billions in revenue that Hollywood had been losing for years. But it didn't work out that way. The fundamental problem is that streaming economics do not function like the old Hollywood business model. In the classic Hollywood business model, each release window represented a fresh opportunity to collect money. A film would first generate profit at the box office, then it would earn more through DVD sales, and finally it would bring even more lucrative cable licensing deals. This gave studios 3 distinct bites at the apple for every single project. Streaming collapses all of those individual revenue streams into one flat monthly subscription fee. Once a movie or show is uploaded, it lives on that platform, most likely forever, which means there is no secondary window to exploit. No one's going to pay for a digital copy of a movie they can already watch for free with their Netflix logged on. No one's going to pay for a digital copy of a movie they can already watch for free with their Netflix account. And since studios pull their libraries onto their own apps, the passive income from TV syndication has essentially evaporated. Consider the physical media market, which used to bring in over $16 billion every single year. By 2024, that market collapsed to less than $1 billion, representing a 94% decline that forced retailers like Target and Best Buy to stop selling DVDs and Blu-rays altogether. That safety net that used to protect studios from a box office flop is essentially gone. While the home video market was dying, theatrical attendance continued its long, steady decline. The pandemic only made things worse by accelerating a massive shift in consumer habits as people grew more comfortable staying on their couches. By 2023, theater ticket sales had plummeted 43% from their 2002 peak of 1.57 billion admissions, leaving studios without their primary engine for growth. So the industry looked to streaming to bridge that massive financial gap, but the math never actually added up. Streaming is a hungry beast that requires a constant stream of expensive new content just to keep people from hitting the cancel button. This creates a brutal content treadmill where studios must spend billions every year just to maintain their current subscriber base. When interest rates spiked in 2022, the cheap money that fueled this production boom disappeared overnight, making every new show significantly more expensive to produce. For years, traditional studios tried to act like Silicon Valley tech companies by prioritizing growth over actual profit. Netflix had the advantage of being the first to the party, but the legacy studios were playing a desperate game of catch-up where the rules were stacked against them. We have to remember that content is not software. You can't just scale it up infinitely because every new story requires a massive, unique investment of time and capital. By 2023, these financial cracks became impossible for the industry to ignore, and studios finally realized that streaming revenue could not support the massive volume production that they were used to, which led to immediate budget cuts and a wave of corporate mergers. As the panic set in, Hollywood doubled down on the safest bets they could find, which is why we saw an endless flood of Marvel, DC, and established franchises. They leaned into everything that looked like a guaranteed return on investment, but even that strategy is starting to fail as audiences are growing tired of the same formula. Superhero fatigue is a real phenomenon, and people are simply stopping themselves from showing up to every new installment. In this era, Hollywood has become a reactive protagonist that's struggling to keep up with the plot. Instead of truly innovating or adapting to the digital landscape, the industry is clinging to risk-averse strategies and IP-dependent sequels. The old business model is broken, and it turns out that the streaming wars was not going to fix everything that we hoped it would. So we have to ask the question, did the culture wars, did woke, did all these different political terms actually cause the collapse of Hollywood? The short answer is no. The real culprits are shifting technology, the rise of free content on YouTube, the death of the movie theater habit, and the fact that nobody buys physical media anymore. These are the structural forces that are actually tearing the old system apart. However, it would be a mistake to say the culture war didn't play a role, because it certainly added a lot of fire to an already dangerous fire. We should be clear that Hollywood has always been a political place. There was a time when seeing an interracial relationship in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was a massive controversy, and Marlon Brando famously used his platform to protest the treatment of Native Americans. Politics in film is nothing new. But after 2016, politics began to take center stage in a way that felt different and much more polarized. It felt like every piece of art had to pick a side, and in many cases, the message began to take precedence over the actual story structure. When the theme became more important than the craft, the execution of the film always suffers, and modern audiences are very quick to notice when they are being lectured. When beloved franchises like Star Wars or Indiana Jones failed to meet high expectations for their fans, the backlash was loud and immediate. Content creators like the Critical Drinker and Nerdwriter built massive followings by tapping into that frustration and deconstructing why these stories just weren't working for people. Instead of listening to those critiques, many people in the industry just took a defensive stance, essentially telling the audience that if they didn't like the new direction, then they maybe shouldn't watch their shows. And that kind of take it or leave it attitude worked back when Hollywood was the only game in town, and for nearly a century, the major studios held a total monopoly on high-quality video production because the tools needed to make a movie were too expensive for the average person to own. But that monopoly has been shattered. Today, between TikTok, YouTube, and new AI tools, audiences have an infinite number of other ways to spend their time. Small independent creators can now build their own global audiences without ever needing a studio's permission. We are seeing a massive shift where younger generations openly admit they would rather watch a YouTuber or play a video game than go to the movie theater. Hollywood is now finally starting to wake up to this reality, and we're seeing some major pivots. The culture war didn't break the business model, but it did make the existing cracks much more visible to the public. It gave an audience that was already unhappy a reason to look elsewhere for their entertainment. And when they looked and they found a world of other alternatives that didn't exist a decade ago, they left. And Hollywood thought that they had this capped out audience, but their gatekeepers have lost their keys, and that changes the game for every creator working today. So what does this massive industry shift actually mean for you as a screenwriter or creator? Today we can look at Hollywood as a reactive protagonist. The major studios have become incredibly risk-averse and almost entirely depending on existing IP, leading them to cut production volume instead of innovating. But this retreat is actually a good thing for new creators because it creates a massive opening for new voices to step in. The gatekeepers are losing their absolute control over the industry. That means you no longer need their permission to start building a professional career. And while studios will keep doubling down on sequels and franchises because they are safer investments, the gatekeepers are losing their absolute control over the industry. This means you no longer need their permission to start building a professional career. And while studios will keep doubling down on sequels and franchises because they're safer investments, you're leaving a vacuum for original storytelling. Executives know they can sell toys, theme park tickets, and video games based on established brands, but they're terrified of unproven ideas. This means that original ideas will increasingly come from independent creators. These are the writers who have already done the hard work of proving there's a demand for the stories before the studios even get involved. The new model of success looks like nothing like the old one. You don't need a studio to greenlight or validate your idea anymore. And by using platforms like YouTube, TikTok, newsletters, or podcasts, you can build an audience and establish IP value before you even walk into a pitch meeting. These digital spaces allow you to demonstrate that your voice resonates with real people. You can show rather than just tell. And you can show that your stories have a following, and the new technologies that are available to us make things possible that weren't even possible 5 years ago. This is creating a much more democratic creative process for everyone involved. Back in the 90s, the standard model was to write a great spec script, sign with an agent, and hope a buyer eventually materializes. That lottery system still works occasionally, but is no longer the only way to break into the room. Today, the industry is looking for creators who have already built something substantial on their own. The old version of Hollywood is collapsing because the revenue streams that funded decades of creative risk-taking have vanished. But a new Hollywood is being built right now by creators who understand that proving demand is now a core part of the job. If you're a screenwriter or creative, this is your moment to stop waiting and start creating your own momentum. The future of Hollywood starts with you. Thank you for watching.